Hey guys, welcome to another installment of the Great Divorce lecture. So, before we get started, just want to wish you guys the best during this time and hope you're doing well. And of course, if you have any questions or concerns, email me and let me know. So, for the preface, we had talked about kind of the backstory of why C.S. Lewis is writing it, the thought experiment that's going through his head, that he claims this is not necessarily supposed to be a literal interpretation of the afterlife, but rather a thought of what makes someone a follower and what in their heart causes them to choose to follow or to choose to not follow. So we're going to be discussing chapters 1 and 2 today. First, we're going to kind of do it in chronological order as best I could, while still keeping the semblance of themes. So first we're going to talk about the setting. So it opens up where it talks the protagonist. We're gonna assume it's Lewis. So I'm going to address him mainly as Lewis throughout the series. Lewis is walking down a long, mean street. He references there's constant rain, and there seems to be the sun setting indefinitely. There's a state of the sun going to set and leave to darkness, but yet it doesn't change. As well as it talks about numerous shops and houses filled with hoardings. It mentions bookstores and restaurants and stores and various other things that a normal city would have that would be hustling and bustling and trading. He mentions the works of Aristotle would be sold at a bookstore, and maybe that could reference this idea of pursuit of philosophy, secular philosophy specifically. But there's no people. He mentions that it's a busy town without the busyness of people, and that he can't in fact see anyone as he walks through all the various long, mean streets. It's empty. And yet there's stations but no transportation. There's no trains or cars or anything. And then he eventually runs into this thing, the queue. That's simply British for meaning a line. People standing in line to go somewhere. And so he starts describing the queue. This is the only semblance of life or afterlife that we have thus far. So what might this be saying? Perhaps that the setting is talking about filling the void with stuff, yet there's no one taking interest in it. So let's continue on. The queue has various characters. So first we're going to talk about the man and the woman. It describes the woman as waspish. So if you want to kind of keep track of the waspish woman. And they have this sense of, well, I want to be here simply because you want to be here. And then the man responds, I'm only here because you wanted to be here. We don't want to be here. I just want what's best for you. And although this seems to be this unselfish act of, well, I want whatever you want, it's almost this competitive aspect of I'm more unselfish, therefore I am better. Almost this holier than thou mentality based off of unselfishness. Ironically, bragging about being unselfish for personal gain may imply to being selfish. And then it continues on. And then describes a big man, and he runs into the conflict with this short man who mentions to talk to Lewis, nothing of significance. And then he tells him to get out of line, threatens to beat him, simply because he has his own rights. I have my rights to do whatever I want. And what we see is this, throughout the novel, he's going to constantly repeat that. I just want what I deserve. Now, is that a negative thing? Not at the surface level. Getting what you deserve, if you work hard, you reap the benefits of that. However, this is seen in a negative light, just like the unselfishness was. He is so overcome by anger and holding a grudge against what he didn't get and that he deserved that it has this sense of selfishness. He, again, is painting it in this sense of fairness, but in actuality is causing him to be full of rage. And then next we have the discussion of the couple. They've been addressed as the androgynous couple, and researchers in studies because it says that you can't tell the sex of one or the other because they're constantly together. And so the androgynous couple references this idea of they are so focused on themselves that they forget why they're in the line. They're close together, they're so intimate that they don't really pay attention to the fact that they're waiting in a line, and they go, why are we here in the first place? So they're so overcome by enjoyment of each other that they leave the line. What could this reference? Some research has shown that they can reference the idea of lust, and that all of these people represent a certain sin, whether selfishness or lust or anger or whatever. And so they reference this idea of being so infatuated in one other person that you miss the big picture, you miss the point. You're so overcome by lust that you forget to realize, or you forget that there's a much bigger point. And so they end up leaving. And so Lewis continues to step further into the queue. And then lastly, we have this reference of a cheating man. What he does is he goes, hey, you can go up in line, or I'll give you 5 bob, whatever currency that is, to go in front of you in line. And all we hear is a clinking and then a woman screaming. We don't know exactly what occurred, but we can know that both of them end up leaving, or at least the woman definitely ends up leaving and screaming and running away. We don't know exactly what's happening here, but that can reference either greed, also selfishness, just like the others, or this idea of cheating someone else out of something. And so those are the main archetypes or characteristics we see in these characters in the queue. What C.S. Lewis is trying to say in this is that people, when given the chance to see something so much greater, i.e. we'll find out is this heavenly realm, they are so overcome by their own selfishness that they end up leaving and missing out on something so much greater. So even when given the chance to take a holiday from the hell state, they're so overcome with their own selfishness that they end up leaving and going back to what they already know. And then it has the reference of the bus driver. This is going to be the end of chapter 1, where he's described as full of light, wearing purple, in almost this majestic state. What you might think in this is that, oh wow, the people might be overcome with awe of, this is so majestic, this is so wonderful. Purple, you have to know, references royalty, status in the literature. So the fact that it's light and purple references this almost holy figure of authority. And instead of being struck in awe by this, the characters get angry and start berating him of who does he think he is to be better than us, and we're good too. And the angry man is like, I have my rights, and they start getting angry and yelling at this bus driver, and he does nothing. And so that's kind of where the chapter ends. The chapter ends with Lewis sitting down next to the tasselled-headed poet. So now we'll get into chapter 2. Chapter 2 has 2 main characters. It has the poet and then has the intellectual that Lewis run into. So first we're going to talk about the poet. The main important thing here is that he never feels appreciated. He talks about being a victim in the injustice of capitalism, and so he moves to Sweden to go to the communist ideology. And then his education, he has 5 different institutions he's been to, yet he doesn't get appreciation and recognition for what he earned. And then lastly, he meets a woman, and she's so focused on monogamy, and that's not his thing because she feels possessive and jealous, and he doesn't need that in his life. He wants to be able to do what he wants and get what he has earned. It sounds very similar to the angry man. Yet, he takes it out a little differently. He ends up talking about how he never found recognition for his talents, and no one appreciated who he was. So what he did was he jumped in front of a train and died. He goes, this was a mistake, because during this time period, and definitely in the time of Dante, we actually have a realm with all those who have died by suicide go into a certain circle of hell. And so one can assume C.S. Lewis is emulating that. but he puts a little twist on it. He goes, the poet goes, it's a mistake because I ended my life, I'm here, but I shouldn't be here. I need to go to the heavenly realm. And so he goes, but when I was down here, I thought maybe I could make the best of it. So he visits one of his poets that he idolized, Cyril Bello, and he gets treated, and he goes, he didn't respect my poems. He didn't respect what I had written because he was so focused on himself. And how dare he be so focused on what he's done and what he's written, and he can't focus on what I did. How insensitive of him. The irony in that is that the poet, the tassel-headed young poet, is doing the same exact thing, so focused on his own works. So he says, I'm going to the heavenly realm so that someone can actually appreciate the talent that I have contributed to society. That these people are so focused on themselves, I need to go to the place of esteem where I was meant to be, but by some fluke mistake, I was not. So I'm not coming back here. I'm staying up in this heavenly realm so that someone will finally appreciate his intellect and his talent. So what can we know from that? We can know that what C.S. Lewis is talking about in this instance is that the whole motivation for this man was seeking recognition and missing the whole point of unselfishness and servanthood and living this life of morality and value. That eventually that is a basis in a lot of Christian thought is this idea of being a servant, unselfishness. Yet the young poet had missed the point. He was so focused on his own talent and seeking recognition that he lived his entire life and ended it for the sake of not being recognized. So there's this disconnect, and one can question when we go to the heavenly realm and see this character again, which we will, how does that work out for him? Does he finally get recognition? Or perhaps is heaven almost worse? So now let's go on to the next character. This character can be called the intellectual-looking man, is kind of what he's addressed as. And one thing, the really important thing that he does for the story is he describes the surroundings of hell. He gives the backstory of hell. And he explains that the space is not empty. There's actually an ever-increasing amount of people throughout the time that he's been there. However, it doesn't seem that way because every time someone has a quarrel or an argument with someone, they move to a different house and leave that house abandoned. That's why there's so many houses, that it makes everyone else seem so far apart. It's because each person has hundreds and hundreds of houses. Every time there's a disagreement, they just move further and further on. And he says the town has unlimited space, therefore there's a never needing a chance for reconciliation. They never need to come to terms and compromise with that person, because why should they if they can just go somewhere else? And he says that these gradual removals of people create this astronomical distance that it's almost impossible to see anyone else because of how separate everything has become. This continues, or this also is in relation to historical figures, right? There's this idea of, well, when I go to the afterlife, I will get to meet all these amazing historical figures. And he goes, yes, in theory, however, they're so far away that it's almost impossible. He mentions that there's a time where two people decide to go and visit Napoleon. And he goes, he's the closest. It only takes about 15,000 years. And obviously there's some witty humor that Lewis is putting in there. Only 15,000 years. It's a short trek. And he goes, when these two people get to see Napoleon, they thought, oh, I would be able to talk to him, get to know what he's like. And it describes that they watched him for a year, just pacing and putting blame on everyone else. It was this person's fault. It was this person's fault. It wasn't my fault that this happened, because how could it be my fault that it did not survive? And so it seems like this state is misery. It's the constant blaming of others, that you're just sitting in your own thoughts forever. There's no punishment per se, but rather the punishment is the constant state of isolation and loneliness and not taking responsibility for your own actions. He describes Napoleon's house as this majestic palace of columns and beautiful imagery. However, at the seat of it is a man who's in constant misery. He then describes that these buildings are not actually what they seem. They don't keep the rain out. And you'd think, how does a building not keep the rain out? He goes, this is an image of reality. It's an illusion of safety. It's an illusion of comfort. And maybe Lewis is talking about here how this city is a representation of how people are missing the point in life. How all the things that make us feel safe and make us feel comfortable and make us rationalize why we are good people is actually just an illusion to make us okay with ourselves. It never keeps the rain out, the pain, the sadness. And then he goes, well, you see, it's an allusion also to the idea of safety for when the sun goes down. What does that mean? What he's possibly talking about is this idea of eschatology, or the end times, where eventually this final situation will happen where the sun will go down and the unknown will happen. Now, a lot of people on the bus get mad at that and scream at the intellectual man saying, you don't know what's going to happen. They've been saying that for years and it's never happened. Maybe this is Lewis poking fun or addressing some philosophical debate of the end times and talking about how some intellectual people are saying, there's going to be, the world's going to end, and others are saying, no, it's been going on for billions of years, it will never end. So maybe he's poking fun at that, or just referencing that even in anything on the unknown, people will still quarrel. But lastly, he goes, the intellectual man states why he's going. And he says, because I'm going to take something from the heavenly realm, something real, something tangible, and make it a commodity, make it something some people want. And therefore, I will bring community through this common desire. He goes, I'm going up there only for a short period of time, and I'm going to capitalize on this commodity and therefore help society. He mentions that his main goal is for the betterment of society in hell, which is completely ironic if you think about it. Well, okay, yeah, we're going to better society in a world where no one can get together in this hell state. However, what it seems like he's actually doing is being selfish. He's trying to capitalize on monetary gain that he can get for this, but under the veil of betterment of society. Maybe Lewis is talking about how anyone can take something that seems unselfish and make it selfish. And that the man is saying community is not built on relationship, but rather an economic stability. We don't need to care about each other as long as we have this common economic stability. And Lewis comments on maybe that's not true. Maybe our community is not based off of economic stability or a commonality of desire, but rather interpersonal relationship. And so the book ends where they finally go up and Lewis looks down and sees this vast gray. And he looks in the mirror and notices the people that seemed very solid in the beginning are now almost shadows. And he looks at himself and sees a bit of transparency. And that's where it ends. And we'll figure out why that is in the next chapter or two. So that's a basic summary and analysis of chapters 1 and 2 of Great Force. And I look forward to next week's chapters 3 and 4. Have a great weekend.